technology is constantly changing, constantly moving. And so the work that I do is a moving target and we get presented with new and different things all the time. I love exploring new data and I love figuring out exactly what it is. And then we publish records about it if we can. But it's fascinating to me what humans think they can do. It's a little scary and fascinating at the same time.
I'm attorney Dave Craig, managing partner and one of the founders of the law firm of Craig, Kelley Faultless. I've represented people who have been seriously injured or who have had a family member killed in a semi or other big truck wreck for over 30 years. Following the wreck, their lives are chaos. Often they don't even know enough about the process to ask the right questions. It is my goal to empower you by providing you with the information you need to protect yourself and your family. In each and every episode, I will interview top experts and professionals that are involved in truck wreck cases. This is After the Crash. Well, welcome to another episode of After the Crash. Today we have Scott Greene, the CEO of Evidence Solutions, Inc., as our guest. Scott is one thing, and him and I have in common is we've both been doing this for over 35 years. So I don't know if that makes us wiser, more experienced, or just old. But anyway, it's my pleasure to have Scott. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I hope it's more experienced and wiser. I like wisdom a lot. So
I keep telling my wife that, but I don't know. So Scott is the CEO of a company called Evidence Solutions, Inc., that does full service computer technology, digital forensics, collects data, helps collect data. It examines and analyzes that data. And then my favorite thing about these guys is that then they explain that in a way that we understand. And so it can be very complex, but yet, if you want a forensic, somebody to testify at trial, you want somebody who can take all that data and analyze it and then explain it. And Scott does an excellent job. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your company?
So Evidence Solutions was founded back in actually 2008. It was a derivative of another company called Great Scott Enterprises. Great Scott Enterprises was sold in 2011 because I fell in love with doing digital forensics. It's been a wild ride, as you know, David, and I'm sure the audience understands that technology is constantly changing, constantly moving. And so the work that I do is a moving target, and we get presented with new and different things all the time. We have to figure that out. We have to understand what it means and then interpret it and, of course, explain it. It's grown since then. We also have some truck driver standard of care experts and some other areas of expertise, which I'm proud to add. We have some accident reconstructionists. We have some truck driver standard of care experts. Have a couple of aviation experts. Just because we wanted to diversify a little bit, and we found people who were very interesting and interested in doing the work.
And I think that I think that's great because you tend to expand in areas to offer services that are compatible with the digital stuff. So a lot of what you're talking about is kind of goes hand in hand.
Yeah. So the truck driver standard of care experts, I fell into back in 2012. There was a guy named Don Asa who was an expert in that industry, and he died suddenly. And I had a relationship with him and his company. And because I did the digital side and they did the trucking standard of care side. And so his widow called me after he died and said, I don't know what to do. Come help me. And so that was back in 2012. And we, subsequent to that, integrated that into the company. But yeah, the ties together are real nice. And it also helps that the truck driver standard of care experts get exposed to the digital evidence that we can find and harvest out of vehicles, because it's something that they need to know how to deal with and at least understand what's available so that they can find the right person to deal with it if the digital evidence department isn't on the case.
And I think another thing for the audience, because this is designed just for everyday average folks who happen to unfortunately experience a traumatic event, a traumatic crash. We do a lot of semi-tractor trailer stuff, but I think that it's important for people who are listening to understand that at least the experts that I like to work with, do both sides. They do both. They work for the victims of a semi-wreck, but they also will work on the defense side. Because I think that in order to be credible in this day and age, jurors are a little suspicious of somebody that does 100% one side or the other. So talk a little bit about that and what role that plays. Is it helpful to you to do both sides?
It's incredibly helpful for me to do both sides, both from a jury trust standpoint, as well as an exposure to what happens on both sides. I do about 50% civil plaintiff. I do about 30% civil defense. And some of the most fun work I do now is actually 20% criminal defense, because it's interesting to get into that realm as well. But being exposed to both sides makes me a more credible expert. Understanding both sides makes it such that I can present it better and understand what the evidence really means and explain what it really means. And so I enjoy working both sides, and I think it is valuable.
And it certainly I like to dispel. I mean, the good experts are not somebody that are just hired guns that give an opinion that the lawyer wants. And I think too often people that aren't in this business, or lawyers maybe that aren't working on the type of case or the magnitude of the cases that we work on, they think that, gosh, you just hire somebody and they give you the opinion that you want. But nothing is further from the truth on good lawyers that are working on significant cases. You would never risk a multi-million-dollar case by hiring the wrong expert. You want somebody who's objective, and you want somebody who tells you if you're wrong, or if you got evidence that's damaging. I just as soon know that on the front end.
That was an important lesson early on that I learned, is that attorneys want to know if there's something bad. They want to be able to get in front of it instead of be behind it. So yeah, it's important, I think, for that to be true and for you to have balance in it, for sure.
Well, let's talk about, you alluded to in the very beginning, this field, the data collection and interpretation, has changed dramatically just within the last few years, let alone since you and I both started 35 some years ago. Talk a little bit about how it's evolved, what type of data is out there. I mean, where do we find this stuff? And where should we be looking after a wreck?
Okay. So I'm going to start and work with the term or with a truck accident. And the reason why a truck accident is in there is because there's different sets of data in the truck, but then some of it translates directly to what you'll find in cars as well. In the trucking world in the last 5 years, there was a law that mandated that drivers move from a paper record to an electronic logging device. An electronic logging device is basically a GPS system that collects where the truck is and allows the driver to enter his driver status, whether he's on duty, whether he's driving, whether he's in a sleeper or off duty, and record that and have that data transmitted right to the company, as well as being stored locally. These devices have gotten a lot more sophisticated. There's messaging now between the company and the driver. The company can send out dispatch information. So this is where you're going to go to collect the load. This is where you're going to go to deliver the load. Here's who you talk to. Here's phone numbers, things like that. And so they become also, in addition to just the logging device itself, they become actually a communications device. And so, in the world where we thought we were going to end up with something that was more reliable than paper records, unfortunately, something else happened, which is kind of interesting. And that is that the data also has to be editable by the company and could be editable by the driver. So just because the federal government decided this was a really good idea and it's going to be the panacea that eliminates all the cheating in the world, it actually didn't happen that way. We still see cheating all the time with it, which is unfortunate. That the evidence should be the evidence in an electronic logging device.
Yeah, when I first started practicing, I do almost exclusively semi-tractor trailer cases nowadays. But when I first started, I did a little bit of everything, and so these truck drivers had to carry these logs, paper logs, in their truck. And I can remember the first time that I did an inspection and found two logs. I had a log that, the truck driver never got back to his truck. He got hurt. So he was taken from the scene. We put a restraining order to keep the truck from being altered or touched or even opened. We got there the same time the defense did, and lo and behold, there's two sets of logs, and one of them was already filled out ahead of time. And they had that affirmation part where they affirm that's true, and they were already signed for days going forward in the future. And so it was always tricky because we had, again, before electronic data, we would have to get the fuel receipts. We would have to collect paper documents to toll, weigh stations. We would do different ways to try to track that truck. And sometimes it was easier than other times. But that's what we had to do before they did to these electronics. So talk to a little bit about, so what's happening now?
So what's happening now is very similar things are happening. One of the ways that they're cheating is actually to unplug these devices and then drive for a while. We call it the hyper truck. The truck will be in South Bend, Indiana, and then it'll drive 200 miles further south, and then all of a sudden come back on the radar. The GPS coordinates start back up again. The thing that the electronic logging devices bring to the marketplace is increased safety if they're monitored. The trucking companies can monitor these trucks pretty much in real time and run reports about what the driver is doing, when the driver disappears, when they go off the air, so to speak. There are reports that can report that information back to the trucking companies. Some actually use it, and some are improving their safety dramatically by doing so. Others, of course, are ignorant of it or not playing the game right, or just simply don't care. And those are unfortunate events for certain.
So have you had cases where you've seen truck drivers actually play with the system or try to cheat the system, the electronic logs?
Yeah, so they've cheated the system. One of the ways is to unplug them. One of the ways is to cover the antenna of the GPS so that the GPS is not recording where it is. There's also legitimate reasons for the data to be edited. Say a truck driver forgets to clock in, for instance, then the company has the ability to make an adjustment to his log. Same thing is if he walks away from the truck and forgets to log out, they have the ability to make those adjustments as well. Most of the systems actually will tell you when that data has been edited, and that's a good thing because then you can look at it and you can ask questions and find out what the truth is. But yeah, there's some editing that goes on, and certainly the unplugging of these ELD devices is one of those things in the marketplace.
And so when we started off talking about semis, so we have electronic logs with the GPS, which again gives the companies feedback instantaneously, immediately, in a lot of cases. But there's also other things in a semi that folks may not be aware of. There's other computer data. Talk about some of the other stuff that you can find in a semi.
Sure. So some of the other stuff that we can find are as simple as DVRs, digital video recorders, where there's a camera that's facing backwards into the cab to photograph or videotape the driver, to watch the driver's actions and reactions, as well as a forward-facing camera that monitors what happens out in front of the truck. These are key because they can show when drivers are paying attention. They can show when the other vehicle is not paying attention, and they're dramatic in what they record. But they run the whole gamut. We of course see both sides of the case in that. We see when the driver of the semi makes a mistake and turns left in front of somebody, and we also see when somebody just runs into the semi off of a side street because they missed a stop sign. Video is very important. I think that it's one of the up and coming things in the marketplace. There's more companies putting them in. Some of the bigger companies have decided that it's a beautiful thing to have video facing forward on the truck when something happens, as well as to see what the driver did. Was the driver paying attention, or were they looking down at their cell phone? And we'll get to cell phones in a minute, but all of that data is pretty important. And so they've become a lot more sophisticated by using at least two cameras. Others have gone to multiple cameras. It's a pretty interesting thing to see the video that's being recorded in our world.
And the other thing, I know some drivers are resistant to have themselves being videotaped. Almost all of them are for the camera facing outwards, but a lot of them don't like to be the camera watching them. And some of them just look at it from a privacy standpoint. Some of them look at, they don't want to be captured if they do something wrong. And some just feel like they should be trusted. But like you, I've seen a lot of helpful videos that go both ways. I mean, I've seen some show that a driver's paying attention and doing what they're supposed to be doing, a semi-driver. Right. And so it really has helped. I mean, it definitely clarifies the picture when you have that footage.
Yeah, it does. It works for both sides. Absolutely.
Now, the interesting thing is I'm seeing more and more, and I'm sure you are, more and more semis that actually have the cameras facing outward. And the other thing that's I think people should recognize is that there's a lot of semis on the highways. And so a lot of these wrecks happen on the highway. And so not only do you have to look at the truck that's involved in the wreck, but you want to pull the 911 records to see if any other truckers called in 911 that happened to be around the accident or saw the accident, and then find out whether they have video footage. I have a wreck that was a fatality, and it was captured by at least 5 different cameras on moving vehicles. And it was fascinating to me that they all showed different points up, but they all showed parts of the wreck or the aftermath of the wreck. So not only should focus on the cameras that are involved in the wreck, but also the ones that might be on passing vehicles.
Well, on passing vehicles, David, and also on businesses around the area. Yeah. I did a defense case a couple of years ago where a semi was accused of crossing the line. There was a lady in a Honda. They were going in opposite directions. It was a head-on collision, and the camera system that was in the store, it was an auto parts store, actually showed a better view than anything. And it actually showed that the Honda had crossed the line, and it wasn't the truck that crossed the line. So that data is everywhere. We've gone down little rabbit holes where we have the first person who we found who called 911, they have video, and then their video has the license plate of somebody else who had video, and you can get a lot of video and it's not just on semis, it's on passenger cars as well.
Yeah. Well, and I have the same, I had a case where a wrongful death case involving a box truck, and they had deactivated the EDR and the electronic control module. And so there was nothing to download from the truck. And however, a business had videotaped, had security camera, and we were able to take that data. And then we were able to have a reconstructionist time it on how fast the truck was passing light post and to track the speed of that truck and prove that that truck was in fact speeding, even though it had, deactivated. The same way with the school bus. First students had deactivated their electronic control modules. So there was nothing to download, but it had a camera inside the bus, and it faced backwards towards the students. And we were actually able to go out and make them bring the bus to the scene, run the route, and at the speed that she said she was going. And then we could show shadows as they passed trees. You could actually see shadows, and we could reconstruct the path of that bus by the shadows that were shown in the video facing the students. And we were able to prove that the pedestrian who walked in front of the bus was killed, but the bus was traveling at a speed. And so they originally threatened us with frivolous, saying that they did nothing with this guy walks right in front of the bus. But because you had the video focusing back, we were able to reenact it. So I think I tell my investigators, assume that there's video in every wreck, and just make that assumption because there's cameras everywhere.
Yep, agreed. There's cameras and information everywhere. True. Yeah.
And so again, like you said before, sometimes it's helpful to our case and sometimes it's not, but I would rather find that out in the very beginning and make a decision on what I do with the case. Right. What other stuff is in a semi what other type of data is available?
So one of the next things that we deal with is infotainment systems. And infotainment systems are those computer systems that are in the dash of cars. And interestingly enough, they're now being installed in semis. It's the way you change the radio. It's the touch screen in the dash. They're starting to control more systems than they ever have. And the number of inputs, as you'll see on the next slide, is actually astonishing. You'll see that there, on some vehicles, there can be hundreds of inputs that come from the car. And the way that that happened is that hard disk drives and storage became so cheap that when the engineers of these products put them together, they said, wow, we have all this space. What are we going to do with it? And so what they did is they started logging everything that happens in the car. So in some instances, I can tell you if the lights were on, and I can tell you the last time the right-hand door was open, if the sunroof was open. I can tell you the tire pressure on the tires, if that's part of the system. They vary a lot, but all the major manufacturers are now putting these in cars because the general public expects them. So we're seeing them but mostly in passenger cars at this point, and they're critical for those types of cases. And I'll explain how they connect with cell phones here in a little bit. But they absolutely are making it also into the higher end tractors. And the newer tractors have them, similar kind of thing. They have tremendous amounts of GPS data, tremendous amounts of other data that's being input and stored in them and collected. And extracting that data can be key in, of course, a lot of cases to determine what happened with the vehicle. Did the vehicle fail? Did the driver do the wrong thing? What happened in this case? So infotainment systems are one of the most up and coming things that we're working on. They're difficult. It takes unique software and hardware to go and collect this data. It's not something you want to do in every case because it gets expensive. But there are cases when certainly commercial vehicles that have them are in a wreck, or the damages are such that it makes sense to pull the data and see what actually happened.
I remember, again, that was something that was completely not available, 10, 15 years ago. Yeah. And I can remember we had a wrongful death case out in Iowa. And it's the first time I hired you guys to go out and look at the informatics system. It was with a car. But it is amazing because you think, these, again, when I started, we didn't have computers, personal computers. Only universities had computers. And now there's really, the informatics system, that's a computer. It's a computer that's, like you said, storing all this data. And I know my car, if I go over the line, it vibrates. If it senses when I'm not staying within the lanes of the roadway, gives warnings. So it actually will tell me you may want to pull off and rest because you must be getting sleepy. And, you think about that, if all that information is stored somehow and you're able to extract it, that can be key to a case.
It can be, and it's amazing how much data is being stored, and it's growing all the time because the rule in the electronics world is we get to store twice as much data this year as we did last year for half the price, essentially, or every 18 months. Moore's Law, that's called, dedicated to a guy from Intel. But we have so much information that we can collect now from these vehicles, and they really are they're computers with four wheels and a steering wheel. They have an engine or they have motors if they're an electric vehicle, but by and large, these vehicles are really just a whole bunch of computers that are all talking to each other. And they do wild things. We've seen cars reboot. You're going down the highway and the car itself reboots because it gets confused. And so the more we play with that, the more we integrate circuits into these cars, it's going to be even more difficult to pull the data because there's so much of it. But it's important to really find out what actually happened with the vehicle.
And what other type of digital data are you looking at and can be found in one of these type wrecks?
So the biggest piece nowadays is cell phones. Cell phones are in every car. Sometimes there's 3 or 4 in a car. They're in every semi. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 in a semi or more. And the beauty about them and the hard part about them is that they're all completely different. You and I may both own an iPhone 14, but the apps that I have on my phone and the apps that you have on your phone, David, are completely different. And so the interpretation and the collection and analysis of all that data is different. It's one of the most difficult things that we do because the data is so complicated. We ran across one day before yesterday where the data, Friday last week, where the data was something we'd never seen before. It was just it was an app that nobody'd heard of. It tracked people's location. It was actually an emergency call app designed mostly for females to carry around with them and to be able to signal people when something was wrong. It had GPS data in it that was unique to her situation. It was a dram shop case. And so, we needed that GPS data. But in the case of a semi, we also see where, as we talked about electronic logging devices, some of the electronic logging devices now are sharing space on a cell phone. So we're installing an app on a cell phone. It communicates in two directions, to the company and to the driver. It dispatches information or sends dispatch information to the driver so they can go pick up their load and deliver it. It tracks GPS information. It has a connection to the engine, so it'll track faults and track when the engine's running and that kind of thing, how fast it's going outside of the GPS calculation that it can do. But they're incredibly powerful devices that we carry around every day, and they can be used for good and they can be used and be dangerous if it distracts people. I did a defense case, it's probably a year ago or something like that, where a doctor is driving down the highway and a semi has become disabled in the center lane. Not because of the driver's fault. There was a mechanical issue, and he'd come to a stop from another crash. He'd come to a stop and he couldn't get his tractor moving. And this driver comes up behind him and basically parks his BMW 7 Series underneath the back of the trailer. And what we're able to do with his cell phone is look at the data. We knew that he was late for lunch, and he had sent a text message to the guy he was late for lunch with. We knew he had sent a text message to Bob asking if he could, if Bob would call him. Now, Bob, it turns out, was not really Bob. Bob was the mistress that the wife didn't know about.
Oh, gosh.
And then just 8 seconds before he crashed his car and died, he opened Facebook on his cell phone. And the message there, and I interact, of course, with human factors experts, and they're telling me that really you just don't want to use your phone while you're driving, even if you're using Bluetooth. It's just a bad idea. And I personally have cut most of it out. It's not zero, but it's approaching zero. I used to think talking on the phone was just fine. But good human factors experts and distracted driving experts will tell you that it's not. And so cell phones provide a tremendous way to communicate, but they're also a temptation. There's some evidence that iPhones were meant to be addictive, and I believe they are. I really do. There are times I can get on my phone and just go, and it's like, oh, I got to stop. So.
Well, and I think that, we see that. Even when I do a jury trial, last jury trial I did, oh my gosh, taking the phones away from the jurors was like,
sure.
They were not happy about it, because you think about it, you go a whole day without looking at your cell phone. It's extraordinarily difficult. I'm with you. I've been doing this long enough, and I've unfortunately seen the results of what happens when people use their phone. And I'm now to the point where I just won't use mine. Now with the new vehicles, it's hands free pretty much, but so still you have to reach and touch the screen, or you do different things, push a button. And there's certainly even been studies that show that hands free Bluetooth cell phone usage is still distracting. And some trucking companies don't allow their drivers to even use Bluetooth, even though the federal regs allow it. No, it can be extraordinarily dangerous. So let's talk a little bit about that. So there's a bad wreck, and a wreck happens, like this gentleman who ran into the back of the semi and died. So first of all, how do you gather the data? And then how do you interpret it? I mean, tell me a little bit about how your role in all that.
Okay. So the gathering of the data comes usually from 2 or 3 sources. The cell phone itself, which we use specialized software and hardware to connect to the cell phone and download the data out of a cell phone. And that data can be all of the apps, all of the information that comes with the operating system on the phone. Depending upon the phone, we get more data or less data. It just depends upon the make and model of the phone and what it's stored. And of course, the apps, as I referred to earlier, that the different apps store different data. So you'll see these apps that Life 360 is one. It stores GPS data and it gets transmitted to the cloud, or Strava, the bicycling app. So each of these devices has different apps on it and makes it unique. Each device is going to have a unique set of data. We collect that data with these hardware and software devices that extract all the data from the phone, and then we look at different pieces of the phone and different apps on the phone for different information. Of course, one of the first things we want to look at is, were they sending or receiving a text message? Were they on the phone? Were they on WhatsApp, which is another way to make calls and send and receive text messages and things like that. Of course, we look for Facebook. As indicated before, this gentleman ran his car into the back of a semi, 8 seconds after opening Facebook. That's what he was looking at. Mm-hmm. So we look at that data from the cell phone. In addition, we get the call detail records, which are the records that are available from the carrier, AT&T or T-Mobile or Verizon. Those records will show what the phone did and interacted with their hardware, with their towers. That data is recorded very accurately because they used to send bills about it. Now they just tell you how much data and how many calls you make. I think for the most part, they're not sending it not billing you by the minute anymore, but they still record that data and it's very accurate. That data from the carrier may include the cell tower that the cell phone was connected to. If it's on a call for a long time, it may show multiple cell towers, and so movement through time and space. And then, as I indicated before, the cellular tower actually collects data that is outside of that. There's NELOS data, which is a distance from the tower that can be collected from cell phones, and AT&T uses that to track things. With the advent of 5G, this higher, faster, more accurate internet speed, we're actually going to be able to track people very finely on the planet, because the 5G signal is only a quarter of a mile long or so. It just depends upon the urban area. And so we're going to get more accurate information. And then that same cell phone data, believe it or not, cell phones disappear in litigation, David. I know that's going to shock you, but we've had people throw them out into the desert. We've had people throw them back down a highway. But back to the infotainment system, now we have a different record, because people are making phone calls using their infotainment system. They're hands-free, right? And they're making phone calls. The newer, more sophisticated infotainment systems will actually read you a text message and allow you to respond. So there's that information is in there as well. And so the data is being collected, sometimes in multiple places, whether it's the cell phone, the carrier, or the infotainment system in the car. In addition, you can have Bluetooth devices that are talking to the phone outside just the car itself. And so that's where that data is being collected and used for the most part with cell phones. It's not uncommon for some truck drivers to have multiple cell phones. They'll have a corporate cell phone and a personal cell phone. And so we want to look across that information too. What other phones were there? It's a pretty sophisticated way for us to look at data, to collect a cell phone, but it's also very successful in showing that the driver was not on a cell phone, or he had just opened Facebook.
Well, I think that's, it's really amazing. And it's got to be challenging. It's almost like you're putting a puzzle together. You're taking, and collecting all this data, trying to figure out and comparing it to one piece of data to another piece of data to try to figure out, where is somebody, what are they doing before a traumatic event.
It is. It's one of those things that I love the puzzle part of what I do, for sure. I love exploring new data, and I love figuring out exactly what it is. And then we publish records about it if we can. But it's fascinating to me what humans think they can do. It's a little scary and fascinating at the same time. I'm working a case where the guy was on a 3-person conference call, added more people, read and responded to a text message, all while operating his commercial motor vehicle. That's just, I can't even do that sitting down on my couch. It's fascinating to me what people do. It just is, dangerous or not, it's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, we've had cases where people have been watching pornography while they're operating their semi, or I actually had one with a car as well. And it's because your phone's connected to the internet, and so they're looking at it and sending photographs of people back and forth, and it's like, what were they thinking? But clearly, they don't think. Most of them don't think they're going to run into somebody. And I actually we had a case where a volunteer firefighter was killed by a truck. And it was a distracted driver that killed my client. And we actually bought, at the end of the case, simulation machines, actual machines that you can drive and text, and it shows you the dangers of texting and driving. And I gave one to the fire department where he worked at. I gave one to another fire department. And then we kept one that we use for kids and drivers training to show. And the thing is that everybody thinks they can do it. Everybody thinks they can text and drive. But the reality is, and it's usually because they've managed to avoid wrecks. And the more they use their phone, then the more confidence they have. And so the more they think, well, I can do this without a problem. And the problem is that nobody has ever stopped in front of them or walked in front of them while they've been doing it. And the simulation machine, the thing I love about giving it away and using it is that you put them behind there and they know that they're going to be tested, and yet they still fail. Because you can't really do it. Very few people can actually very rarely do it and text and drive and then have somebody stop in front of them, or a dog run in front of them, or a person run in front of them. But I think people are overconfident, like you said.
They are. And like I said, it's fascinating to see what people will do. So are these, I'm segue just for a second, are these expensive devices?
They're not. They're about 10 grand. When I bought them, they were around 10 grand. I'm looking at, because like everything else, technology is advanced. So I want to look and see what the new ones have. But we've used them. We take them around the different driver's ed classes, and they're always excited about them. And so, and my theory always has been, if you save one person, it's well worth it. And so, and then the fire departments use them and for safety events. And so usually the fire department we'll give one to the fire department. They call us, and then they have theirs and we have ours. And we'll have 3 of them set up, and we run kids through them and adults through them. And, it's just, and most of the time the kids are telling me that their mom or dad does text and drive, and they use their cell phone. And so, but, like you're in this business like I am, and, you don't, when you see one of these scenes, they never leave your mind. And you think, I want to get home, and I want everybody else to get home. I could do other types of law. But the reality is people are overconfident and they tend to use this stuff. And the data is there, and they're not going to get away with it. Even if they cause a wreck, I'm going to hire people like yourself, and you're going to be able to figure it out. You can't. Yeah. Right. And then you see, I have had cases where I've worked with the prosecutor's office. So where, the defendant, in my civil case, was using their cell phone and killed my client. And the police department doesn't have the technology that you have. Most of the police departments do not have the money and the resources. But in a civil case, I can hire you and people like you, and they can extract that information. And then I can my families always want me to turn it over to the prosecutor's office, to the police.
Sure.
Because they want, somebody punished for killing their family member while using their phone. And so not only can it hurt you in the fact, I mean, number one, you should care about hurting someone else. Secondly, there could be a civil consequences in a civil case. But thirdly, there could be criminal charges.
Sure.
And I think that you're seeing, and the easier it is to obtain this information, then the more available it is. Although, like you said, it's getting more complex with these informatic systems. So,
yeah, and I work with police departments. I offer them all of my technology, all the technology that the company has. If we need to help you solve a problem that we're not involved in, let's do it, because my company can write checks for things that they need. And, by the time the police department or the city approves the expenditure, we could be too far on down the road. And so I want to do that. I spend time every year educating police officers. I've done that now for probably 7 or 8 years. And I just spend some time every year educating them on what we see in the marketplace, what works, what doesn't work, why it's important, why they should pay attention to it, that kind of thing. So because sharing that knowledge to me is critical for the safety of the rest of the world. We need to know what that looks like, and they need to know what they're up against. And, not just in the criminal world, but also in the civil world, because there's some shared some crossover there between the two that they should know.
Well,
about.
I think that as we advance, there's going to be more data for you to try to obtain. Because now you see people wearing watches and wristbands that track them. Yep. And I have a pair of my shoes. Our Under Armour has tracking in their shoes. And I always joke about it. My wife bought them for me for my birthday. I'm like, hey, wait a minute. Are you tracking me? But they actually have tracking, so that helps you if you work out, if you run, if you walk, whatever. It will track have a GPS system in it, and will
Sure.
map it out. And even if you're driving, it still will work. You're seeing, like I said, the wristbands, the different types of devices. My phone, I have a Google phone, and every month it sends me where I've been for the whole month. It shows me and it shows photographs that I may have taken at those locations. So you think about that, it's like, holy cow. I don't do divorces, but my God, it's got to be a gold mine for divorce cases.
It is a gold mine for divorce cases, and I've used it quite a bit. We didn't talk about the Google takeouts, but yeah, Google phones, or even if you just have a Google account on an iPhone, it will track you and tell you where you've been and what photographs. But I have worked cases where there was a child custody issue where the parent was not supposed to take the child out of the state, and they went all the way from I think it was from Colorado all the way up to Seattle and back in a car, and I could just trace them as they went up and trace them as they came back. No, we didn't take her out of the state. But there's a lot of data out there, and it's increasing all the time.
Yeah. Anything else that you think that folks ought to know about this whole area that we haven't talked about, or that you want to share?
No, I think I want to share something. It's just that what we talked about, if you can minimize your use of your cell phone while you're driving, please do. It is a distraction. My distracted driving experts that I interact with will tell you they just don't even do it anymore. And there's studies out there that show that you shouldn't. It's not my area of expertise. I don't testify about that. Not my deal. But I do know that those studies exist. I've not done a study, so I'm not a distracted driving expert, but I know they're out there. I personally made that choice. I think that's all right.
And I have as well. And I think, and I'm not an expert in that area either, but when you see time after time of people sending a text message or looking at Facebook or looking at a website seconds before they die, then that's all I need to know. Or the seconds before they kill somebody, is that's enough for me. And so I can remember when cell phones first came out with the intent on as lawyers, you're always trying to maximize your time, your usage. And so I'm always I used to be on a cell phone constantly. I just looked at it as it was a good business. I mean, if I was traveling somewhere, then I would use my phone to talk on meetings or whatever. And I've completely discontinued doing that. So, Scott, I really appreciate, your insight. I've enjoyed working with your company over the years. You've helped me with my clients. I would encourage anybody out there that's listening to this and you need a forensic expert in this area. Scott and his company is one of the best, if not the best, in this area. And I would encourage you, not only are they good at what they do, but they're easy to work with and they're good people. And the one part of it is that we talked about is that you definitely, you can be the smartest person in the world. You can be the best at what you do, but if you can't communicate it, then you're really not any help to a lawyer, because we have to be able to communicate to a jury. And I think by listening to you on this podcast, people will get an understanding that you are easy to understand. You do put it in ways that we can all understand. And that's the ultimate end game.
Yep, it is. And thank you, David, for the kind words. I pride myself and my company on the fact that we do and can communicate it in plain English, so that, you have to be able to understand it, and it is complicated. And the other experts make it complicated, and that's unfortunate because the jury really has to understand it.
Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure, David. Pleasure working with you. Thank you.
This is David Craig, and you've been listening to After the Crash. If you'd like more information about me or my law firm, please go to our website, ckflaw.com. Or if you'd like to talk to me, you can call 1-800-ASK-DAVID. If you would like a guide on what to do after a truck wreck, then pick up my book, Semi-Truck Wreck, a guide for victims and their families, which is available on Amazon, or you can download it for free on our website, ckflaw.com.